Few moments in history have been as decisive as that day at Gaugamela. On one side stood Darius III, king of the colossal Persian Empire, with an army seemingly capable of sweeping any enemy off the face of the earth. On the other, Alexander the Great, with a numerically inferior force, but a strategic mind that could bend reality in his favor. What happened on that battlefield wasn't just a victory, it was a redefinition of war, leadership, and history itself. But what made Alexander win against all odds? What drove a young Macedonian king to challenge an empire that had existed for centuries and emerged triumphant? Many believe that great conquests are the result of sheer strength alone, but the truth is another. War is a battle of minds, and Alexander played at a level that no one else could comprehend. If you think you've seen epic battles before, brace yourself, because the story of Gaugamela will change the way you view strategy, ambition, and power. And what's even more impressive, the same tactics Alexander used can be applied to your life. Yes, that's right. Deep down, war and life follow the same rules. Those who plan ahead win. So if you want to understand how one man defeated an entire empire and how that knowledge can transform the way you tackle challenges, stay with me. What happened in 331 BC still has a lot to teach us. The winter of 331 BC was not just a period of rest for Alexander and his men in Egypt, it was a time for strategic preparation. While the soldiers recovered from long campaigns and absorbed Egyptian culture, the Macedonian king was already envisioning the inevitable clash with the Persian Empire. Darius III wouldn't stand idly by after the defeat at Issus, and Alexander knew that the next encounter would be decisive. Like a chess master anticipating his opponent's moves, he used that time to reorganize his troops, secure supplies, and win hearts. And it wasn't just about military strategy. His coronation as pharaoh in Egypt reinforced his divine status, a move that would later prove key in his conquest of the known world. With the arrival of spring, the march resumed, but not without a clear purpose. Every step toward the heart of the Persian Empire was meticulously calculated, for Alexander understood that victory wouldn't come solely from brute strength. His generals, hardened by the rigors of war, received precise instructions on battle formations, defensive tactics, and advanced strategies. After all, what set Alexander apart from a mere commander was his ability to see beyond the battlefield. He viewed war as an art, where every move was a brushstroke in his grand masterpiece of conquest. Patience was his ally, and boldness his signature trait. Meanwhile, as his troops advanced, Darius was assembling his own army. News of Alexander's movement spread like wildfire throughout the Persian Empire, stirring both fear and determination in equal measure. The Macedonian king didn't just want to win. He aimed to dismantle the Persian structure from the inside out, breaking their morale before even lifting a sword. But what lay ahead would require more than strategy. It would demand a decisive blow to the very backbone of the enemy. And for that, Alexander needed to secure every territory along the way, consolidating his power before the final showdown. Before challenging Darius again, Alexander knew he had to consolidate control over the lands he had conquered. A wise king does not advance without first ensuring that what lies behind is secure. So he methodically marched through Syria, Phoenicia, and Palestine, crushing resistance and absorbing strategic allies. Every city taken was a blow to the Persian structure, reducing their supply lines and undermining their influence. In Tyre, for instance, he demonstrated his determination by besieging the city for 7 months, even constructing a bridge over the sea to capture the fortress. Alexander wasn't just a warrior, he was a visionary. Egypt, for its part, welcomed Alexander as a liberator. After years under Persian rule, the Egyptians saw in him a new pharaoh, a ruler who respected their traditions while also promising a more prosperous empire. He founded Alexandria, a city that would not only serve as a strategic hub, but also as a symbol of the cultural fusion that would define his reign. While Darius attempted to regroup his army, Alexander wasted no time. He wasn't just conquering territories. He was winning hearts and minds, ensuring that his presence would be remembered not for terror, but for brilliance. Yet Alexander wasn't content. His gaze was fixed firmly on the heart of the Persian Empire. He knew that a decisive battle was inevitable, and for that, he needed to cross the Euphrates and the Tigris with full force. His march wasn't merely a series of military victories. It was a meticulously constructed foundation for what was to come. Every city captured, every army absorbed, every successful strategy brought him closer to the final showdown with Darius. War wasn't just about strength, it was about control, and Alexander was about to prove he knew how to dismantle an empire piece by piece. As Alexander expanded his domain, Darius III worked feverishly to rebuild his forces. The Persian king knew he couldn't allow another humiliation like Issus. This time, he would muster the largest army the Persian Empire had ever seen, a massive contingent composed of warriors from every province, spearmen from Bactria, archers from Media, cavalry from Armenia, and even the feared war chariots with blades affixed to their wheels. Darius wasn't merely gathering soldiers, he was summoning the weight of a millennia-old empire, a force whose numbers made the Macedonians seem insignificant. But war isn't won by numbers alone. Although the Persian army was immense, it was far too heterogeneous. Different languages, different tactics, different loyalties. Darius relied on numerical superiority to crush Alexander, not realizing that an army lacking unity is like a giant built on a foundation of sand. Alexander, on the other hand, didn't need a crowd. He needed an efficient war machine, where every soldier knew his role and every general understood the bigger picture. What the Persians had in quantity, the Macedonians made up for in cohesion. And so the two empires were about to collide. Darius chose the battlefield with cautious calculation, preparing for a final combat that would erase Alexander's name from history. He didn't just want to win, he wanted to destroy. But did he truly understand the mind of the man he was about to face? Alexander wasn't just a skilled commander, he was an unpredictable strategist, a man who transformed challenges into opportunities. And while the vast Persian army was gathering, the Macedonian king already had one thing on his mind: to breach the Tigris barrier and choose the precise moment to strike. If there was one thing Alexander mastered above all, it was the art of movement. Instead of taking the obvious route and confronting the Persians where they expected, he decided to cross the great rivers of Mesopotamia, the Euphrates and the Tigris, with strategic and surgical precision. It wasn't enough to simply cross. He had to outsmart Darius and ensure that his army wasn't caught off guard. Thus, while the Persians kept watch over the Euphrates, anticipating his arrival, he was already maneuvering toward the Tigris in a bold move that would change the game. Darius expected a warrior, but he was about to face a master of war. The crossing wasn't easy. The Tigris was treacherous, with strong currents and waters that could easily drag soldiers and their equipment away. But the Macedonian discipline made all the difference. With improvised engineering and crossing tactics worthy of a modern army, the soldiers crossed the river with minimal casualties, positioning themselves strategically for the impending clash. Meanwhile, Darius still believed he had the situation under control. Little did he know that his opponent was already preparing to strike at the most unexpected moment. And then it happened. Alexander, now on the far side of the Tigris, realized he held a precious advantage: initiative. While Darius was still organizing his colossal army, trying to predict the enemy's moves, Alexander was already setting the rules of the game. It wasn't just about strength or courage. It was about dominating the battlefield before the fight even began. Now, with the crossing complete and his troops ready, only one step remained, choosing the spot where the fate of empires would be decided. And that place would be Gaugamela. Darius believed he could wear down Alexander even before the battle began. His plan? Turn the land into his ally and let the Macedonian army wither before the confrontation. He ordered a scorched earth policy, burning crops, poisoning wells, and destroying any resource that might be useful to the enemy. The logic was simple. Without food, without water, and under the scorching Mesopotamian sun, Alexander's soldiers would succumb to hunger and exhaustion before even raising their spears. If Darius couldn't beat him with strategy, he'd win by attrition. But Alexander was no ordinary general. He anticipated the move and adapted his strategy masterfully. Instead of depending on the enemy's supplies, he maintained impeccable logistics, ensuring his men had food and water throughout the crossing. Moreover, he quickened his march, preventing the Persian army from completely destroying the region's resources. Every time Darius tried to undermine him, Alexander responded with an even more precise maneuver. Alexander wasn't merely withstanding adversity, he was using it to boost his men's morale, and ironically, what should have been Darius's advantage turned into his own downfall. His colossal army, far more dependent on supplies than Alexander's, began to suffer from its own strategy. The Persians were stuck with a plan that hurt their own soldiers, while the Macedonians advanced swiftly and determinedly. Darius wanted to control the conditions of the battlefield, but he realized too late that Alexander didn't play by anyone's rules. He made his own. Now the stage was set. Gaugamela would be the place where everything would be decided. Darius did not want to repeat the mistakes of Issus. He chose Gaugamela with calculated precision, an open field where his vast army could move freely, to ensure that his chariots, with cutting blades, would run unobstructed. He had the terrain leveled, creating a veritable death strip for the Macedonians. His intention was simple: use numerical superiority and mobility to crush Alexander before he could find a weak spot. But what Darius saw as an advantage, Alexander saw as an opportunity. The Macedonian king studied the terrain and adjusted his strategy. He knew that the Persians relied on the traditional formation, a long line that would try to encircle him, so he planned something different: flexibility. Instead of merely holding his ground, he devised a feint and counterattack tactic, luring the Persians to advance where he wanted. Moreover, the open plain allowed his cavalry to maneuver quickly and precisely, exploiting gaps and striking at the right moments. Darius thought he had the perfect board. Alexander was about to scramble the game. As the dust rose over Gaugamela, the Macedonians stood ready for the clash. This wasn't just another battle, it was the ultimate duel between two empires. One side, Darius's massive force. On the other, Alexander's military genius. The Persian king relied on numbers, but Alexander trusted in quality. And he knew that on a battlefield where every move mattered, a single decisive blow was worth more than 1,000 aimless swings. Now, all that remained was the collision of these two forces. On the night before the battle, Darius was restless. His army stayed alert, anticipating a surprise attack from the Macedonians. Alexander, on the other hand, did something unexpected. He ordered his men to rest. While the Persians spent the night awake, tense and exhausted, the Macedonians slept, soundly recharging for the day ahead. It was a masterstroke. A warrior's greatest enemy isn't the adversary's sword, but exhaustion. Darius didn't realize that even before the battle began, he was already losing. And that wasn't all. Alexander let paranoia seep into the Persian camp. Rumors spread throughout the enemy lines, speculating that the attack could come at any moment. Darius's commanders kept their troops on high alert, forcing the soldiers to remain in formation all night long. The result? When the sun rose over Gaugamela, the Persian army was physically present, but mentally drained. Meanwhile, the Macedonians, rejuvenated, were ready to fight with all their vigor. This tactic wasn't just clever, it reflected Alexander's philosophy. He knew that war wasn't merely physical combat, but a battle of minds. Defeating an enemy starts long before the first blow is struck. Many believe that strategy is only about movement on the battlefield. But what about psychology? How many times do people lose life's challenges simply because they're tired, insecure, or lacking a clear plan? Alexander understood that better than anyone. Now, with the Persian army mentally weakened, it was time for the real clash to begin. Darius's army was a patchwork quilt of cultures, combat styles, and military traditions. From the plains of Persia to the mountains of Bactria, through the deserts of Arabia and the forests of India, each soldier brought his own way of fighting. There were fearsome spearmen, Scythian archers, Armenian cavalry, and even the formidable Indian war elephants, trained to trample enemies without mercy. But there was one problem. Assembling a colossal army didn't mean they would fight as one, and therein lay the Persians' greatest weakness. Diversity might be an advantage in times of peace, but on the battlefield, a lack of cohesion can be fatal. The Greek mercenaries hired by Darius were well versed in Macedonian tactics. But the Persian archers lacked the same discipline. The war chariots with blades appeared imposing, yet they depended heavily on flat terrain. Alexander wasn't facing just a larger army. He was facing a fragmented force, where each unit reacted differently to the chaos of battle. And if there was one thing he knew how to do, it was exploit every weakness of the enemy. While the Persians banked on the grandeur of their army, Alexander relied on surgical precision. He understood that a cohesive, well-trained force was worth far more than a disorganized multitude. Many think that victory comes from brute force, but in the end, what matters is knowing where and when to strike. And on the field at Gaugamela, that lesson would be learned in the most brutal way for Darius. The army was ready, the weapons raised. All that remained was a single command to start the battle. Alexander knew he was outnumbered, but he didn't care. If Darius banked on quantity, he banked on intelligence. His battle formation wasn't rigid, but fluid, able to adapt in seconds. At the center, the Macedonian phalanx formed an impenetrable wall of spears, while his elite cavalry, the heteroi, was positioned to deliver lethal blows on the flanks. Behind them, archers and light troops stood ready to respond to any unexpected move by the Persians. The key wasn't to resist, but to lure the enemy into making mistakes. While Darius fretted over crushing the Macedonian front, Alexander prepared his masterstroke. Instead of staying on the defensive, he created a deliberate gap on the right flank, drawing the Persian cavalry into a trap. The Persians believed they were flanking the Macedonians, but in truth, they were straying from the command center, opening a critical gap in the enemy formation. On the battlefield, every detail mattered, and Alexander transformed every enemy flaw into an opportunity to turn the tide. The Persian army was so focused on trying to encircle him that they didn't realize they were being maneuvered like chess pieces. As the chariots with blades advanced and the Persian cavalry scattered, Alexander already saw the perfect opening. He didn't need to defeat the entire Persian army, he needed to hit Darius directly. And now, with the Persian formation compromised, that moment was drawing near. The battlefield was set, and the final storm was approaching. At the precise moment, Alexander did what few would dare. Instead of waiting for a frontal clash, he initiated a calculated movement with his cavalry. His right flank surged sideways, as if attempting to outflank the Persians. To Darius, it seemed like a mistake. He spotted an opportunity and ordered his cavalry to attack, trying to crush the Macedonians before they could react. What Darius didn't know was that he was walking straight into Alexander's trap. He wasn't retreating. He was leading the Persians exactly where Alexander wanted them. When the Persian cavalry bit the bait and advanced with full force, they ended up straying from the main formation, creating a huge gap in Darius's defensive line. Meanwhile, the chariots with blades charged toward the Macedonian phalanx, but were quickly neutralized. Alexander's soldiers broke through, allowing the vehicles to pass before being attacked from behind and the sides. Every Persian assault met with a swift, deadly counter. The battlefield was descending into chaos, but for Alexander, everything was unfolding just as planned. Then came the decisive moment. In the center of the Persian formation, Darius still believed he had the situation under control, but Alexander had already seen what needed to be done. The gap in the enemy ranks was widening, and a general like Alexander never hesitates when an opportunity presents itself. His next move? A direct attack at the heart of the Persian formation. With that, the battle was about to enter its most intense phase. Alexander did not hesitate. He gathered his elite cavalry and, like a bolt of lightning, launched a direct assault into the center of the Persian formation. The target? Darius III. He knew that if the Persian king fell or fled, the entire enemy force would collapse. His knights, the Hetairoi, charged with fury, cutting a path through the heart of the Persian Empire. Dust swirled, cries echoed, and at that moment, history was being written with swords and spears. Darius, seeing the whirlwind approaching, felt the pressure. Surrounded by his royal guard, yet overwhelmed by Alexander's ferocious assault, he faced a choice: fight to the end or save himself. And then survival instinct took over. He turned his chariot and fled. Darius's flight was a fatal blow to his own army. Witnessing their king retreat, the Persian soldiers lost heart. What had been a fierce combat quickly devolved into a chaotic rout. But Alexander couldn't celebrate just yet. On the other side of the battlefield, his left wing was in trouble. Parmenion and his troops were under severe pressure, and Alexander needed to act fast. Victory was close, but one final obstacle remained. What happens when an army loses its leader in the midst of battle? Panic. And that's exactly what spread among the Persian soldiers when they saw Darius fleeing. The king, who was supposed to be the pillar of resistance, abandoned the field, leaving his troops without direction. It was the beginning of the end for the Persians. Many tried to resist, but without clear command, the military structure began to crumble. Soldiers ran in all directions, while the Macedonian cavalry advanced to consolidate the victory. But Alexander couldn't simply chase after Darius. There was a more urgent problem to resolve. On the other side of the battlefield, Parmenion, one of Alexander's most experienced generals, was in trouble. His flank was under heavy pressure from the Persians, who still fought ferociously. If Alexander ignored that part of the fight to pursue Darius, he risked losing a significant portion of his army. Without hesitation, he made a tough decision: halt the chase for the fleeing king and return to aid his men. Victory without cohesion was not victory at all. A true leader protects his own before chasing glory, and it was that choice that cemented his reputation. With a fierce counterattack, Alexander reinforced the left wing, stabilizing the lines and eliminating any remaining threats. Now there was no doubt. Gaugamela was his. Darius still lived, but his defeat was sealed. The Persian king could continue to flee, but the Persian Empire was no more than it had been before. What followed was not just a victory. It was the beginning of Macedonian dominion over the known world. The battlefield, which mere hours earlier had been a stage of chaos and death, now belonged to Alexander. The Persians were in retreat, and the Macedonians raised their spears in triumph. The Battle of Gaugamela wasn't just a victory. It was the crowning moment of Alexander's military genius. He didn't win because he had the largest army, but because he knew how to manipulate every piece on the board with masterful precision. His name would now echo not only throughout Greece and Macedonia, but across the vast territory that once belonged to the Persian Empire. But Alexander wasn't content with merely winning on the battlefield. He wanted to ensure his conquest was permanent. Instead of succumbing to euphoria, he maintained discipline, ordering his troops to consolidate control over the region. Persian cities fell one after the other with little resistance. Darius's generals, witnessing their king flee like a coward, began to rethink their loyalties. And so, without needing to raise another sword, Alexander started dismantling the Persian Empire from within. Yet there was one last detail. Darius was still alive. While Alexander celebrated his victory, the Persian king continued his desperate flight eastward, trying to rally support. But how do you lead an empire when even your own shadow carries the weight of defeat? Alexander knew that the true end of the Persian Empire would only come once Darius was captured, and his next mission was already set: to pursue him and claim what remained of the Persian legacy. Darius fled, but not for long. Betrayed by his own men, he was captured and assassinated before Alexander could catch up. The once mighty king of the Persian Empire ended his life as a fugitive, abandoned by those who had sworn loyalty to him. For Alexander, that meant only one thing: the Persian Empire was no more. His greatest rival was dead, and the path to complete domination was clear. But unlike common conquerors, he didn't merely wish to destroy, he wanted to build something greater. Instead of simply looting and imposing Macedonian rule, Alexander took an unexpected approach. He embraced elements of Persian culture, respected their traditions, and even encouraged the fusion between Greeks and Persians by promoting marriages between his soldiers and Persian women. He didn't just want to conquer lands, he wanted to unite peoples under a single empire. This mindset allowed his authority to be accepted with less resistance, turning enemies into allies. His goal was not merely to be a king, but the ruler of a new world. And so, with the fall of the Persian Empire, Alexander began to look even further. What once seemed like the edge of the known world now appeared as just another step in his journey. With an empire stretching from Greece to Egypt and now Persia, what else could stand in the way of his ambition? The answer lay on the horizon: India, the final frontier of his dream of global domination. But like every great journey, this one, too, would bring unexpected challenges. The story of the Battle of Gaugamela is not merely a tale of conquest, it's a lesson in strategy, courage, and long-term vision. Alexander the Great proved that intelligence outmatches brute strength, that preparation triumphs over chaos, and that in the end, those who look beyond the present moment shape the future. But the question remains: what can you learn from it? How can you apply that mindset in your own life? Are you planning your moves or simply reacting to what's happening around you? Whether in business, studies, or personal life, the truth is that those who think strategically always have an edge. Alexander didn't wait for opportunities to come his way, he created them. Are you doing the same, or just letting time slip? What can you do today to build your own empire, whatever form it may take? If there's one thing this battle teaches us, it's that destiny favors those who dare to act. So, if you enjoyed this epic journey, subscribe to the channel and hit the notifications bell. Here, we explore history in a way no one else tells. You bringing strategies and insights you can apply to your daily life. After all, learning from the greatest conquerors in history might just be exactly what you need to win your own battles. See you in the next video.